to.
All right, so what if somebody like comes in off the street in your class and says, you know, or they watch your videos and they say, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Sounds like some new age nut. He's a guy who created the whole thing himself. It's all in his head, and it has no basis in the world, really. This guy is, you know, he's sounds like a new age guru.
Well, we all know that I'm not new age, but I think that everybody's entitled to their opinion and their view. I don't really care. I could care less what the person says, you know. I think from all the times in my life challenging different things, of course you're going to have views of people. I think it's great if a person just simmers and thinks about it. But people get angry because they feel they have to defend themselves. They have to defend their belief. I would first probably find out, I would try to talk to the person first and find out where the reasoning comes from. And if their reasoning comes from a religious base, then I would say, okay, then that's great that you believe that. Because a person who says that, most likely, 98% is coming from religious faction or some belief, you know, that they believe or belong to some organization. People that are philosophy is really the search for the truth. It's about challenge. So an individual that comes to me and says that or would say that, well, you know, that's fine if that's the way you believe. It doesn't insult me, it doesn't mean anything to me. Okay. For me to come back and challenge it and say, well, you're wrong, it just brings me into their group. Unless they put up their hands and they're going to hit me in the head, well, okay, then I have to do something.
How has your teaching changed now from when it was earlier on in years ago?
That's a really...
I think we already answered that,
No.
Loaded question.
How has it changed?
It's evolved
in relationship to what you're talking about with
the
violence?
teaching. Yeah, the teaching has, and talking about violence.
Yeah. Like when you taught back then in terms of violence and how you want to approach violence now.
Because we talked about the abstract version of violence as creation, and not getting back to not just violence that you meet on the street, but the way that you teach and the way that you approach violence with your students years ago, and how has it changed to now?
Well, years ago, with just sticking to violence, what violence was back in the day.
How did you teach your students differently?
Well, back then, I would say a more violent person, and I did have a religious agenda at that point, and I had a goal for that religious agenda, in a way that I believed very young. You know, like in my throughout my teens and into my 20s, and as I started getting into my later 20s and whatnot, it started to change, but. Part of that is that I was always around aggressive, violent people. So it was always street people, it was always, you know, different groups and clubs that I was involved with or that I grew up with. And I found myself always in these battles with very aggressive men and women that were already pretty violent in their own right. But in a kind of in a criminal sense, but not from their perspective. You know, like criminals never think that they're criminals. They just go against everything that the society represents. And so therefore they attack it in a whole different ballgame. Basically, what you have is really theirs. So the violence that I was subject to as a person that was growing was always teaching extremely already violent people. I think the biggest change in my life as a career of actually becoming a teacher, which I never wanted to become, it's just something that just happened. I kind of rebelled against teaching for a very long time. For a very, very long time. Even when I was teaching, I didn't want to teach. I just seemed to get stuck with it, and I was good at it. But I didn't really accept it, teaching up to probably maybe 15 years ago. You know, really teaching for the sake that this is what I think I'm good at doing. Teaching and making people think. I think the biggest change for me as far as teaching in the martial arts was switching my teaching, switching the type of people that I used to teach back in the day to the people that I teach now. Basically, the people I teach now are people that really need to protect themselves from people that I taught years ago that were already aggressive, big people that were already pretty tough. And I never really went too far with them. Went far with myself as far as learning, but I never went far with them as teachers because they always went back to, you know, their toughness and how tough they are as human beings, you know, whether they're big people or just tough people or fight rough, or they always go back to who and what they are. I could never lead them out of their comfort zones because that's where their comfort zone was, and that's where my concept of violence really started coming into play. You know, creative violence versus negative violence. And negative violence being something that people hold on to. You know, I've dealt with those people all my life, and a lot of those individuals feel their strength comes from their aggressive violence. And when they don't have it, they really can't act on it. And everything comes from that until somebody comes along and destroys it. And that's basically what I taught to them. It's not to let other people come and destroy it, how to take that negative violence and make it into creative violence. People I teach now are people that are, you know, kind of sheltered all their life, that haven't really experienced violence. You know, people that don't really know how to deal with it if it comes their way. And look at violence as also fear. So if you got a guy that dresses the part and he looks mean and he walks into your home, just bursts through the door and walks into your home, and there's a couple there, just his look and his presence and his idea of the violence that he expresses just seems to trump anything that that couple may be able to do to defend themselves. And so I switched it, you know, basically teaching people that the real avenue to really protect yourself and your family is through letting the mind melt through the body. It's not about size or weight or this, that, and the other thing. The difference with a violent person, they know how to take that because that's where the strength comes from. The difference with a non-violent person, they have to recreate themselves in order to deal with it, to take a disadvantage and make it into an advantage. You know, one of the greatest aspects of combat is the element of surprise. You know, and how to switch your perception of thought, how to just switch it. It's not a matter of being able to be this big person or to have this certain image. It's a matter of bringing it out of you when you need to bring it out of you. You know, to listen to the many voices that trigger the different emotions within you, what Mr. Lee calls emotional content. You know, and how to bring that creativity into an avenue where you really have to protect yourself and family. So on the physical level of what violence is, I teach, I would guess, it to people that want to intellectually grow and change. You know? And if I was to teach a group of people that today, which I still do, that are already aggressive and violent, they see what I'm about, they know what I'm about, and they suddenly calm down, they listen. If they're willing to change what it is that they need to change. And most of those people are older. You know, people that have survived it. You know, people that have been through all this stuff, and all of a sudden they're in their 40s now, and they're saying, you know, I'm getting a little old for this. You know, now wait a minute, you know, I need to understand that there's something more here. And then they take the arts for learning a little bit more about how to calm their temper down, how to get more in tune or in touch with what they felt or why they felt the way that they did.